So since I already showed you how to get to the instructions for the final project in the last video, here we are in the instructions for the final project. What I want to do in this video is just talk a little bit about the sources that you will need for the final project. So please remember that what you're doing here is creating an annotated bibliography in a digital format on Adobe Spark. So what you'll need to do once you have your topic and research question, if you have any questions about that or you're not sure what topic or question you would even like to research, don't hesitate to ask me for help. I'm more than happy to help you brainstorm about a topic. I won't choose one for you, but I will ask you some questions just to see what kinds of things you're interested in general. And actually, if you just email me and say, I'm interested in cooking and dance and whatever, just some general ideas so that I can hopefully suggest a New Mexico history topic that you'll be interested in researching. And if I know something that you're interested in, that will help. Once you've done that, you will go and create your list of sources. So this is just a bibliography that's not annotated, as explained below. And then your completed annotated bibliography on Adobe Spark that I showed you in the last video. I've just scrolled down to the section of the instructions that talk about the list of sources, or the non-annotated bibliography, the second step. This is where you're provided with the list of sources that you will need. So in total, you will need to have 8 sources. One of those must be a primary source. In the first unit, we'll talk about the difference between primary and secondary sources for the purpose of doing history. In a nutshell, primary sources are those that were created at the time of the event itself, and secondary sources are those that were created after the fact based on primary sources. You will need 2 academic secondary sources. There's a video to help you think about what is academic, and I'll talk a little bit more about it as well here in a minute. You need 3 other secondary sources. It's fine if you find 3 other academic sources, or you could find stories on the internet, different places, as long as they pass your test for credibility. And here's a link to give you some ideas about what makes a source credible. That's just fine. And of course, it should be relevant to your project. Lastly, you need to include 2 social media sources. This, of course, could be Facebook, Twitter, blog posts, Instagram, and so on. Here, you're not so much thinking about credibility, because credibility may be lacking with social media, as we all know. It's good if you can find some credible social media sources. But instead, what you want to do is figure out whether or not people are talking about your topic online in kind of informal ways. So that's what the social media sources are about. If you find that there are no social media sources on your topic, there are plenty for Billy the Kid, not as many for things like the Encomienda, for example. If you find that there aren't any, just make a note of that in your project as you go along. Say there weren't really any social media sources. This is why I think that's the case, and that's good enough. You don't have to worry about it. So again, if you can find them, that's awesome, because that will help you think about your topic in a different way, how people are talking about it now. And if you can't find them, you don't need to sweat it, is the point I'm trying to make here. When you submit your bibliography, and this will set you up to complete your annotated bibliography on Adobe Spark, you do need to use a proper citation format. So I'm allowing you to use whatever you're familiar with. If you are familiar with MLA because you're an English major or whatever it is, use that one. If you're doing APA because you're in the social sciences, use that one. If you're a historian, use Chicago. If you don't have any idea what I'm talking about, click on this link, and that will give you a quick guide for how to format your bibliography. It is Chicago style. That's the one historians use. So since it's a history class, that's the one I'm going to offer you. All right. So again, this was just kind of going over the sources that you'll need. You need to make sure you have at least the minimum. If you find 2 primary sources, that's awesome. You can include them both, but you still need to include at least 2 academic sources and 3 other secondary sources. That doesn't take the place of one. If you have something that seems kind of out of the ordinary, like you've found 10 primary sources that you just love and you want to do that, email me about it and we can talk it through and see if that would make sense given your topic and your question, to replace some of the others with a primary source, for example. All right, so those are the kinds of sources you need. Just to give you a couple of the examples that I showed in this document, this is the example I showed in the previous video. It's also linked from the assignment instructions. I've given you two examples of sources that I found to help me answer my question here. Why did Manhattan Project officials choose Los Alamos as their base of operations in 1943? So that's my question. Of course, I'm thinking about the Manhattan Project, I'm thinking about Los Alamos, but I have a specific thing I want to know and a specific argument I want to make. I don't know what the argument is because I don't know the answer yet, because I haven't done my research, but I know that's the direction I want to go. And so I found this primary source here. It's a letter from Albert Einstein to President Roosevelt that is telling him that he needs to be concerned with atomic development. This was before the US got involved in World War II. I'm going to open that link because I don't have it open in one of the other tabs already. So this is one, again, you can link to it, you can look at it. As I read through it though, I realized that this one is not relevant. Of course, it's a credible source. It's on a good website, atomicarchive.com. If you look into it, they have a bunch of great primary sources relative to the atomic developments of the Manhattan Project in the early years of nuclear research. And I keep scrolling down to the bottom so you can see the credentials here. It's part of the National Science Digital Library funded by the NSF and so on. So again, those are markers of credibility and academic background. The problem with this source, though, is that it does not help me answer my question. It has nothing to do with locating the project in Los Alamos, although it is a very important source for thinking about why the United States decided to start the Manhattan Project. So I decided, wait, I don't want to use that one. I went and did some research and I found this one instead. This one's also a credible site, Voices of the Manhattan Project. If you scroll down, you can also see its credentials. This is an interview with Oppenheimer, J. Robert Oppenheimer, who was the physics director of the Manhattan Project. He was the guy who essentially made the decision to locate the project in Los Alamos because he had experience there. He had visited New Mexico in the years prior to the Manhattan Project. He knew it was isolated, yet not completely cut off from resources. A perfect place to have a secret project going on. So if you scroll down, you can listen to the recorded interview. This was recorded in 1965, so 22, 23 years after the fact. Stephanie Groff was an author, I should say, who was writing a book on Oppenheimer. And so again, you can read the transcript and get a sense of the information that I just told you. This one is relevant to my project, and that's what I've written. If I click on this, back on this tab, that's what I've written. So for the first one I wrote, this one didn't really work. For the second one, and here it is, I gave an explanation, and here's, again, these are examples of how to do annotations for your project. You can look at these and see what I did to get an idea. I addressed those three issues that you need to address in your project. I summarized the information in the source. I explained why the source was credible in specific detail, and I explained how it's relevant to my research question and how it helped me to formulate my thesis. My thesis is that Oppenheimer chose Los Alamos because it was isolated yet still close to resources for the project. Isolated for secrecy, close to resources to support the project itself. Excuse me. So again, this is just an explanation of the examples that you'll see in these documents that you can access yourself to get an idea of how to do the project. The paragraph that I wrote in between here is a description of what to do if you find some sources that aren't quite relevant. If you find a bunch of sources and you can weed out the irrelevant ones and find a good relevant one, that's fine. If you can't, though, really find a very relevant primary source because you're limited to the 2-week window of intersession, you only have internet access through the CNM libraries and through Google, it's okay to pick a source that is sort of in the ballpark but not quite relevant, as long as you explain that. As long as you say, this was the best I could find, this is what it says and what it helped me understand, but it didn't quite get me to the answer that I was looking for. That's fine, because that's part of research. That's what happens when you go to figure out, history and what happened in the past and try to write a new narrative about it. So hopefully that's helpful in some way. I wanted to show you another example of something I found when I went to SunCat OneSearch. If you don't know what I'm talking about when I say SunCat OneSearch, you go to cnm.edu, and if you actually just type cnm.edu/libraries, it will bring you to the same spot. This is the CNM Libraries page. Use this box here. I'm going to write Manhattan Project. You might have to use different search terms. You might start wide, broad, Manhattan Project in general, for example, and then narrow it down to why Los Alamos. You might have to take a few different ways of using search terms in order to find all of the resources that you'll need. But once you do that, and depending on how fast your internet connection is, you will get some search results. I'm going to let that work for a second and show you some of the things that I found. I found this book review. This is Kevin Brady's review of John Hunter's book called J. Robert Oppenheimer, The Cold War and the Atomic West. It's a good source. It is academic. It was in an academic journal, the Southwestern Historical Quarterly. But it's a book review, so it's a review of a book on my topic. It might help me understand what books I would be interested in finding, but if I really want the information here, I need to find the book. If you go to books.google.com, type in the title roughly, you will get a digital version of the book. Now, Google Books has previews of most books that are available out there in the world. Some, if they're older, don't have previews. But what I'm driving at here is that you can get digital access to books that are academic sources and be able to read enough of them to complete the project. You won't have to read entire books for this project. We only have 2 weeks. I realize the confines of that. So what you'll do is you'll look and see, what's this about? You can scroll down, and with the Google preview, if it would load, and I might not wait for it to load, but you will get the table of contents, and usually you'll get the introduction. You could read the introduction, get a sense of what the author's doing, what his or her arguments are, and how the source will help you answer your research questions. I'll scroll back up there. And so again, that is a way to get access to books without having to go to the CNM library itself. That didn't work. I'm sorry, my internet connection is not working as well as it should. I'm not on campus today. But what you'll find in CNM OneSearch are many ways that you can narrow down your search to look for journal articles, to look for peer-reviewed journal articles. You can look for books. As long as a book is published by a university press, you can be certain that it was peer-reviewed, that it has that academic credential. Peer-reviewed journals are academic sources as well. I've given you the video. If you go back over here to the final project instructions, this is the one. The link right here takes you to a video that helps you think about what makes an academic source. So hopefully that helps in some way, thinking about the kinds of sources that you need to find, what you'll want to do with them, what you kind of want to avoid, and so on. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. I'm always more than happy to help.